"You're not real cops," I screamed as two uniformed imposters stormed my door at 6 a.m., shouting that I had 24 hours to pack up and get out or face arrest. Patricia, that snake of an HOA president, had been torturing me for months with fabricated violations, and now she'd escalated to actual criminal behavior. I could see her standing across the street with that evil smile, waiting to watch a newly divorced old man crumble under pressure. But when my front door swung wide open, the person who stepped out made that smile freeze instantly. Patricia's face went white as a ghost, and she'd just seen something worse than a ghost. Have you ever had toxic neighbors use dirty tricks to steal your home? Tell us your sweetest revenge story right now. Look, at 65 years old, you'd think I'd be done with high school drama. But here I was, 18 months after the most bitter divorce of my life, trying to figure out how my HOA president had turned into my personal tormentor. My name's David Mitchell, and I spent 30 years as an insurance adjuster before retiring to what I thought would be peaceful suburban bliss. Boy, was I wrong about that peaceful part. After 4 decades of marriage, which ended in court battles and split assets, I was finally adjusting to living alone in my corner house on Maple Street. My adult son visited most weekends to help with maintenance around the property. And honestly, those visits were about the only thing keeping me sane during this whole nightmare. It started small, like these things always do. Patricia King, our HOA president, began issuing citations for the most ridiculous violations you could imagine. But here's what really got under my skin. She wasn't just being petty. This woman knew details about my property that should have been impossible for her to know. I'm talking about specific permit numbers from renovations I did during my marriage, contractor names I'd never mentioned to anyone in the neighborhood, even the exact model numbers of windows I'd installed 3 years ago. When she cited me for my cedar deck using permit number PB20234471, my blood ran cold. That information was buried in city planning documents that most people wouldn't even know how to find, let alone care to look up. How the hell does she know about my Anderson Windows Model AW400 series? I muttered to myself, staring at the citation that had appeared on my door that morning. Patricia was citing me for non-compliant window installation and demanding I hire a structural engineer to verify the installation met current. The kicker, she knew the contractor's name was Riverside Electric for my electrical upgrade, and she was questioning whether their work met standards. This wasn't random harassment. This was surgical precision targeting that required inside information. Someone with access to city records was feeding her my private property details, and that someone had to have legitimate access to databases that regular citizens couldn't reach. The financial pressure was immediate and overwhelming. Patricia structured these citations to hit where it hurt most, my wallet. $800 for a professional landscape architect to redesign my perfectly fine garden. $1,200 for a structural assessment of my deck that had passed inspection just 2 years ago. The compound daily penalties were designed to escalate quickly, and by the time I added everything up, I was looking at $4,800 in total fines if I couldn't resolve these violations within 30 days. For a retiree on a fixed income, this kind of financial pressure wasn't just annoying, it was potentially devastating. Patricia knew exactly what she was doing, and she was doing it with mathematical precision that suggested professional planning. My insurance adjuster instincts kicked in hard. 30 years of investigating fraudulent claims had taught me that criminals always leave paper trails, and Patricia was no exception. I started photographing every citation with timestamps, preserving voicemails she left, and creating case files just like I used to do for my job. Document everything, I told my son during one of his weekend visits. This isn't normal neighbor stuff. We need to treat this like evidence. He agreed, helping me organize the growing pile of harassment materials with the kind of systematic approach that would make any investigator proud. What struck me most was Patricia's use of legal terminology that she clearly didn't understand. She'd mentioned covenant acceleration when she meant covenant enforcement or referenced lien priority in completely wrong contexts. The community isolation was perhaps the most painful part of this whole ordeal. Neighbors who'd been friendly for years suddenly started avoiding eye contact and citing property value concerns when they explained why they couldn't support me against Patricia's campaign. The weird thing was they all used almost identical phrases. community safety, property values, immediate resolution required, like they were reading from the same script. Judy, the teacher who lived next door, was the only one who seemed to recognize that something wasn't right about this systematic targeting. "David, this isn't normal HOA stuff," she told me one evening as we both worked in our gardens. "I've seen harassment patterns like this in my domestic violence training, and what Patricia's doing feels way too organized to be personal." Judy's support meant everything to me during those early weeks when I was starting to question my own sanity. Leonard Thompson, the unemployed former security guard who served on the HOA board, accompanied Patricia during her property inspections, but he looked about as comfortable as a vegetarian at a barbecue competition. You could see the internal conflict written all over his face. He'd follow Patricia's lead, but his body language screamed reluctance. During one particularly tense inspection, I noticed his hands shaking slightly as he read from Patricia's prepared citations. And he kept glancing at her nervously, as if he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. Leonard was clearly being manipulated somehow. But at that point, I couldn't figure out what hold Patricia had over him. All I knew was that this man, who had once been friendly enough to wave from across the street, was now actively participating in making my life miserable. The strangest incidents involved my elderly neighbor who took daily walks past my property. After her routine walks, I'd often discover minor property damage. Sprinkler heads mysteriously broken, fence posts loosened, garden systems that had worked fine for years suddenly malfunctioning. The timing was too coincidental to ignore, but I couldn't bring myself to suspect a sweet old lady of sabotage. Something else was going on here, something I couldn't quite put my finger on yet. My professional instincts told me to document everything and look for patterns, even when those patterns didn't make immediate sense. Every photo, every timestamp, every detail might prove crucial later when I figure out what Patricia's real game was. She knew every permit number from my divorce year renovations. Someone with city access was feeding her information, and they were just getting started. Here's where things got really weird, and I mean Hollywood-level conspiracy weird. Patricia wasn't just targeting me with those surgical property violations. She was orchestrating an entire neighborhood campaign that had the fingerprints of professional coordination all over it. I started receiving concern letters from neighbors I barely knew, all complaining about my property's impact on community safety and property values. But when I laid these letters out on my dining room table and really examined them, the pattern became obvious. Same phrases, same sentence structure, same legal terminology that nobody in our suburban neighborhood would normally use. Property value impact assessment, community safety protocols, immediate resolution required. This wasn't how normal people talked about neighbor disputes. The digital manipulation was even more sophisticated. Posts about my property started appearing on neighborhood social platforms simultaneously, all with identical photo angles and professional editing that suggested someone with serious technical skills was behind this campaign. The timing was too perfect. Multiple posts would go live within minutes of each other, all echoing the same talking points about property maintenance standards and community values. I'm no tech expert, but even I could see that this level of coordination required planning and resources that went way beyond typical neighborhood drama. Someone was running a professional influence operation against me, and they were using my own neighbors as unwitting participants in the campaign. My former friendly neighbors were suddenly avoiding me like I had some kind of contagious disease. The ones who did talk to me cited community safety concerns using scripted responses that they delivered with obvious discomfort. You could see it in their eyes. They knew something wasn't right about participating in this harassment, but they were going along with it anyway. Judy noticed it too. "David, I've been keeping track of these template messages," she told me during one of our garden conversations. "The grammar mistakes are identical across multiple complaints. Someone's writing these for people, and they're not even bothering to customize them properly." Her teacher's eye for detail was proving invaluable in documenting the systematic nature of Patricia's campaign. The accidents got surgical. The breaker for my irrigation controller started tripping under light load. The GFCI by the side gate showed fresh tool marks. And the smart timer logs had gaps like someone had pulled power just long enough to scramble schedules. After the third stunt, I put up a basic camera kit daylight coverage. Nothing fancy, That's when I discovered something that changed everything. The footage revealed a professional-look person in work clothes using my elderly neighbor's predictable walking schedule as cover for approaching my property. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone was deliberately using an innocent woman's routine to mask their sabotage activities. But the real breakthrough came when I overheard Patricia's phone conversation during what she thought was a private moment. I was working in my front yard when her voice carried across from her driveway, and what I heard made my blood run cold. Need property acquisition completed before final res zoning vote and public announcement. 6-month timeline is firm, she was saying to someone on the other end. This wasn't the language of an angry HOA president. This was business terminology, acquisition deadlines, investment timelines. Patricia was talking about my property like it was a commercial transaction, not a neighbor dispute. The pieces started falling into place in ways that made my 30 years of fraud investigation experience sit up and take notice. Patricia kept mentioning someone called her development partner during that phone call, and she referenced investor timeline pressure and acquisition deadline requirements that had nothing to do with HOA violations. This woman was discussing my home like it was already part of some kind of business deal, using terminology that suggested sophisticated real estate knowledge way beyond her volunteer HOA position. Tom Bradford's getting impatient about the acquisition schedule, I heard her say. And if we don't close this within 6 months, the whole partnership could fall apart. That's when I realized this wasn't neighborhood harassment. This was a systematic business operation designed to pressure me into selling my property. And Patricia was just the front person for a much larger scheme. The template analysis became my smoking gun evidence. When I collected all the neighbor complaints and laid them out systematically, the identical grammar mistakes revealed themselves like a neon sign. Patricia was using the same incorrect apostrophe placement, the same misuse of legal terms, and the same awkward sentence construction across multiple supposedly independent complaints. She was literally writing complaints and having neighbors sign them, probably not even reading the content carefully enough to catch her own linguistic fingerprints. My insurance background had taught me to look for patterns in fraudulent documentation, and this was Fraud Investigation 101. Same author, multiple documents, systematic deception. My son was helping me organize this evidence during his weekend visits, and his systematic approach to documentation was proving invaluable. "Dad, you need to think of this like building a case file," he told me while we sorted through the growing pile of harassment materials. His attention to detail and suggestion to create proper timelines and cross-references reminded me of the kind of methodical evidence gathering that made or broke insurance fraud cases. I was starting to realize that my professional background might be the exact edge I needed to fight back against Patricia's systematic campaign. 30 years of investigating fraudulent claims had taught me exactly how to document criminal behavior. And that's exactly what this was starting to look like. The financial manipulation expanded beyond simple citations into threats about mortgage notifications and lien placements that seemed designed to trigger panic responses. Patricia sent emergency assessment letters exclusively to me, using legal language that exceeded typical HOA communication standards and implied authority she definitely didn't possess. These weren't the actions of an angry volunteer. They were the calculated moves of someone who understood exactly how to apply financial pressure for maximum psychological impact. The systematic nature of this campaign was becoming undeniable, and the business motivation behind it was starting to reveal itself through Patricia's careless phone conversations. Patricia kept saying her partner was impatient with the schedule. This wasn't neighborly pressure anymore. It was a timed acquisition play. You know what they say about digging deeper when something doesn't make sense? Well, I went full investigator mode and started researching public city planning documents, figuring that if Patricia had inside information about my property, maybe I could find out what she knew. What I discovered made my head spin so fast I had to sit down and pour myself a stiff drink. My little corner house on Maple Street, the place I'd been living quietly for years, was sitting on what amounted to a gold mine. The city planning website revealed that our entire neighborhood had been designated for commercial reason zoning in planning document ZR 204156 with final approval scheduled for a vote in exactly 6 months. Professional property assessment websites confirmed what the planning documents suggested, and the numbers were absolutely staggering. My corner lot, currently valued at $320,000 for residential purposes, would be worth $4.20 $2 million once the commercial rezoning went through. $4.2 million. I had to run that calculation 3 times before it sank in. No wonder Patricia was running a systematic harassment campaign. She wasn't trying to collect HOA fines. She was trying to steal a $4 million payday right out from under me. The woman was literally trying to terrorize me into selling my property for residential value when she knew it would be worth 13 times that amount in just 6 months. City Council meeting minutes showed the final rezoning vote scheduled for exactly 6 months from now, with public announcement of the approval following immediately afterward. That timeline explained everything about Patricia's escalating pressure campaign. She had a hard deadline to acquire my property, for the commercial value became public knowledge. Once that rezoning announcement hit the news, every property owner in the neighborhood would know about the massive value increase, and there'd be no way to pressure anyone into below-market sales. Patricia's 6-month countdown wasn't arbitrary. It was a business deadline that explained why her harassment had become so systematic and desperate. The research revealed Patricia's business connections in ways that made her professional knowledge suddenly make sense. Her real estate license gave her legitimate access to multiple listing service databases. And when you cross-reference that MLS data with public planning documents, you could piece together exactly the kind of inside information she'd been using against me. Patricia wasn't getting illegal inside tips from city employees. She was doing sophisticated professional research that combined her legitimate real estate access with publicly available planning documents that most homeowners wouldn't know how to find or interpret. This woman had turned property research into a systematic acquisition strategy. Tom Bradford's name kept appearing in property records as Patricia's business partner, and his development company, Bradford Properties, had been acquiring commercial properties throughout the county with impressive consistency. These weren't random real estate investments. Tom Bradford was running a systematic operation that targeted residential properties in areas scheduled for commercial rezoning. The pattern was elegant in its simplicity. Identify properties scheduled for rezoning, pressure vulnerable homeowners into quick sales at residential values, then reap massive profits when commercial development became public knowledge. Patricia was the neighborhood face of what appeared to be a much larger business operation. The financial warfare made perfect sense once I understood the real stakes involved. Those $4,800 and compound penalties weren't designed to bankrupt me. They were designed to create enough stress and uncertainty to make a quick sale seem like the easier option. Patricia was offering to mediate the HOA violations in exchange for my agreeing to accept purchase offers from concerned community members at current residential market values. Now I understood why she kept mentioning immediate resolution opportunities and community-supported solutions. She was trying to manipulate me into selling my property for $300,000 when it would soon be worth over $4 million. My mortgage company started receiving concern letters about property violations that threatened loan review under maintenance clauses, creating the kind of financial pressure that could force immediate action. These letters used professional language that suggested legal expertise and implied authority that Patricia definitely didn't possess through her HOA position. Someone with real legal knowledge was helping craft these intimidation tactics. Probably Tom Bradford's development company, which would have lawyers familiar with property acquisition strategies. The systematic nature of this financial pressure campaign was becoming impossible to ignore, and the business motivation behind it was crystal clear. Leonard's desperate cooperation finally made sense once I understood the financial stakes involved. An unemployed former security guard who was struggling to pay his bills would be extremely vulnerable to promises of property management consulting income, especially if that income was tied to helping acquire a $4 million property. Patricia had found Leonard's financial pressure point and was exploiting it ruthlessly, promising him a piece of the massive payday if he helped pressure me into selling. The man wasn't evil. He was desperate. And desperate people make choices they wouldn't normally make when someone dangles financial salvation in front of them. My son's weekend visits were becoming crucial for organizing all this research and evidence gathering. "Dad, This is way bigger than neighborhood harassment, he told me after reviewing the commercial rezoning documents. These people are running a sophisticated business operation, and they're using the HOA as legal cover for what amounts to property theft. His systematic approach to analyzing the timeline and financial connections was helping me build a comprehensive picture of Patricia's scheme. I was starting to realize that my insurance investigation background might be the exact advantage I needed to fight back against this systematic property acquisition campaign. The property evaluation manipulation became obvious once I understood Patricia's real motivation. Independent assessments that she'd helpfully arranged were showing declining residential values, structural concerns that would require expensive repairs, and market instability that made quick sales seem financially prudent. These weren't legitimate property evaluations. They were part of the psychological pressure campaign designed to make my properties seem like a financial burden rather than a multi-million-dollar asset. Patricia was literally trying to gaslight me into believing my home was worthless when she knew it was about to become incredibly valuable. Community pressure reached its peak with a formal petition drive demanding my removal from the neighborhood for community safety violations. The petition used a professional organization, identical signatures that suggested coordination, and legal language that exceeded typical resident knowledge. This wasn't an organic community concern. It was a manufactured crisis designed to make me feel isolated and unwelcome in my own neighborhood. Patricia was weaponizing social pressure to support her financial manipulation, creating an environment where selling seemed like the only way to escape the systematic harassment. The woman was running a psychological warfare campaign with military precision. The ground under my corner lot was about to be worth more than 13 times its current price, and their clock was already ticking. I was about to learn how far they'd pushed to cash it in. Have you ever discovered something about your property that completely changed everything? What was hiding in your backyard? Patricia decided to escalate from street-level harassment to full legal theater, organizing what she called a covenant enforcement proceeding in the community center conference room. She set up the whole thing like a courtroom. Recorded minutes, parliamentary procedure, official documentation that created an atmosphere of legal authority that was designed to intimidate me into submission. The woman had transformed a neighborhood dispute into what looked like a formal legal proceeding, complete with citations to HOA Covenant Section 12.4b4b regarding property maintenance standards and threats about lien placement and foreclosure initiation that went way beyond anything our HOA actually had authority to do. Leonard looked like he was being led to his own execution. As he reluctantly read from Patricia's script, he kept losing his place, swallowing words and fixing his eyes anywhere but mine. Every syllable sounded borrowed. Property maintenance violations requiring immediate remediation, he read in a voice that got quieter with each word, with escalating penalties for non-compliance leading to potential lien placement and mortgage notification procedures. This wasn't the confident security guard persona he usually tried to project. This was a desperate man following orders that made him obviously uncomfortable. My insurance adjuster's instincts immediately identified authentication problems with their so-called official documents. Wrong municipal codes, expired ordinance references, unauthorized legal language that suggested someone was copying legal text from completely unrelated sources. These weren't legitimate HOA enforcement documents. They were fraudulent paperwork designed to look official enough to fool someone who didn't know better. After 30 years of investigating insurance fraud, I could spot doctor documentation from across the room. And Patricia's legal citations had more red flags than a communist parade. The woman was literally creating fake legal documents to support her property acquisition scheme. The biggest smoking gun was my discovery that Patricia had altered the HOA bylaws without a proper membership vote. But I needed professional legal verification to prove the fraud. During my research of the original HOA incorporation documents, I found discrepancies between the current bylaws Patricia was citing and the ones that had been legally filed with the county. She had added enforcement powers that didn't exist in the original governing documents, created penalty structures that exceeded HOA authority, and established procedures that violated state laws governing homeowner associations. This wasn't just harassment. It was systematic legal fraud designed to create enforcement authority that she didn't legitimately possess. The HOA board voted to approve an immediate assessment and compliance notification to my mortgage lender, threatening a loan review within 30 days if I didn't resolve the property violations to Patricia's satisfaction. This was financial extortion using fraudulent authority, and the systematic nature of it suggested someone with legal expertise was helping craft these intimidation tactics. Tom Bradford's development company would definitely have lawyers familiar with property acquisition strategies, and the sophisticated language in these threats suggested professional legal consultation rather than amateur neighborhood bullying. Judy attended the hearing as my witness and documented procedural violations that would have made any legitimate legal proceeding invalid. David, they're violating their own bylaws about notice requirements, quorum standards, and voting procedures, she whispered to me during a break in the proceedings. I've been taking detailed notes, and none of this would hold up in real court. Her teacher's attention to detail was creating a parallel evidence file that questioned every aspect of Patricia's claimed authority. Judy's witness support was invaluable because she could document the procedural violations from an objective third-party perspective. Tom Bradford attended the hearing as a concerned community member, implying broader business support for Patricia's enforcement actions without revealing his financial stake in acquiring my property. He sat in the back row wearing an expensive suit that suggested successful business operations, occasionally nodding approval when Patricia made particularly aggressive threats about my property violations. His presence was clearly designed to add psychological pressure and suggest that Patricia had powerful community allies. But knowing what I now knew about their development partnership, his attendance was really just theater designed to make their private business dispute look like a legitimate community concern. Leonard's private revelation after the hearing finally exposed Patricia's manipulation tactics in ways that confirmed my suspicions about financial coercion. "David, I need to tell you something," he said quietly as we walked to the parking lot. "Patricia promised me property management consulting income if I helped with HOA enforcement, and honestly, I desperately need the money. I lost my security job 6 months ago, and she's been promising a steady income if I just follow her lead on these citation procedures." His admission confirmed that Patricia was exploiting his unemployment to buy his cooperation in what amounted to systematic property theft. The professional consultation discouragement was another systematic tactic designed to prevent me from getting an effective legal defense. Patricia kept mentioning that involving lawyers would escalate community tensions unnecessarily and suggesting that neighborhood mediation would be more appropriate for resolving property disputes. She was literally trying to talk me out of seeking professional legal advice because she knew that any competent attorney would immediately identify the fraudulent nature of her enforcement claims. This wasn't neighborly concern about legal fees. This was calculated manipulation designed to keep me from discovering her lack of legitimate authority. Municipal authority claims were Patricia's most audacious lies, suggesting coordination with city compliance and joint enforcement procedures that implied official government backing she definitely didn't possess. She kept mentioning municipal connections and legal enforcement options that were completely fictional, designed to make her HOA harassment seem like it had legitimate government support. The woman was literally claiming to have authority she didn't possess, using official-sounding language to mask what amounted to private business pressure tactics disguised as community enforcement. The evidence I was gathering during this formal hearing would prove crucial for fighting back against Patricia's systematic campaign. Every procedural violation, every authentication problem, every fraudulent authority claim was being documented with the kind of methodical approach that would make any prosecution case stronger. My insurance investigation background was finally paying off in ways that could protect my property and expose Patricia's systematic fraud. The formal hearing wasn't just harassment. It was Patricia creating evidence of her own criminal behavior that would eventually be used against her in court. Leonard's hands shook while reading those citations. Desperation makes people crack, and tomorrow I'd find out exactly what Patricia was hiding. During what I thought was just another routine weekend visit, my son dropped a bombshell that changed everything about how I understood the situation I was facing. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you," Marcus said as he pulled his county sheriff deputy badge number 4287 from his wallet. "I've been quietly analyzing all this harassment evidence using my professional skills. And what Patricia is doing isn't just neighbor drama. It's systematic criminal behavior that requires law enforcement response. And my 28-year-old son, the one who had been helping me with property maintenance during his off-duty days from his rotating shift schedule, was actually a county deputy sheriff who had been professionally documenting Patricia's entire campaign. Marcus explained that he'd requested a local assignment after my harassment began, using his law enforcement authority to create a professional quality evidence file that would meet prosecution standards. Everything we've been organizing isn't just documentation, Dad. It's been building a criminal case using proper timestamps, chain of custody procedures, and witness statement protocols that will hold up in court. His systematic approach to evidence gathering suddenly made perfect sense. And I realized that my insurance investigation background, combined with his law enforcement expertise, was creating an evidence collection operation that Patricia had no idea she was facing. Marcus skimmed the bylaws, closed the folder, and didn't sugarcoat it. Those powers aren't in the originals and they violate state law. This isn't HOA drama. It's chargeable. Patricia's timeline acceleration made sense once Marcus explained that she was probably sensing increased resistance to her pressure campaign and moving her fake police plan earlier than originally scheduled. Criminals get sloppy when they feel cornered, he told me. And Patricia's about to make the kind of mistake that will give us everything we need for prosecution. His law enforcement experience helped me understand that Patricia's escalating desperation was actually working in our favor, creating opportunities for her to expose herself through increasingly reckless behavior. Leonard's breakdown was accelerating in ways that suggested his psychological pressure from Patricia's financial manipulation was reaching critical levels. Marcus noticed the stress indicators that I'd been seeing: hand tremors, contradictory statements, and obvious discomfort with the escalating harassment methods. That man is being coerced, Marcus observed. And coerced witnesses often become cooperative witnesses when they realize they're being used in criminal schemes. Leonard's growing desperation was making him a potential ally rather than just a reluctant participant in Patricia's systematic campaign. The property surveillance equipment that Marcus provided was professional law enforcement grade, designed to document unauthorized property access and trespassing evidence that would support criminal charges. We need admissible evidence of her sabotage activities, he explained, while installing motion-activated cameras with night vision capabilities around my property perimeter. If Patricia or her associates are accessing your property, we're going to catch them in the act with evidence quality that will satisfy any prosecutor. His professional approach to surveillance was creating documentation opportunities that exceeded anything I could have managed on my own. Judy's formal witness statement became much more significant once Marcus explained how her teacher training in recognizing harassment patterns would make her testimony particularly valuable in court proceedings. Educators receive specific training about systematic abuse recognition, he told me. And Judy's professional documentation of Patricia's community manipulation campaign will carry significant weight with prosecutors and judges. Her willingness to provide formal testimony was creating independent verification of Patricia's systematic harassment that went beyond just my personal experience. Tom Bradford's final ultimatum to Patricia about acquisition deadlines was creating the kind of pressure that Marcus predicted would force mistakes and exposure of the broader criminal conspiracy. When business partners start threatening each other about failed timelines, they tend to take desperate actions that create prosecutable evidence, he explained. Tom Bradford's pressure on Patricia is actually working in our favor because desperate criminals make sloppy decisions. The development partnership was becoming unstable in ways that would benefit our evidence-gathering efforts. The fake police scheme intelligence that Leonard privately shared with me gave Marcus crucial advanced warning about Patricia's most desperate and criminal escalation. She's hired actors to impersonate police officers, Leonard confessed during a private conversation with costume rental and fake warrant preparation for early morning maximum psychological impact. And this information allowed Marcus to prepare a response that would turn Patricia's final intimidation attempt into her complete downfall. Dad, when those fake cops show up tomorrow morning, we are going to be ready for them, Marcus told me with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how to handle criminal impersonation. The evidence trap completion that Marcus and I coordinated was designed to capture Patricia's criminal behavior using multiple documentation methods simultaneously. recording systems, witness coordination, proper chain of custody procedures. We were creating a comprehensive evidence-gathering operation that would provide prosecutors with everything they needed for successful criminal charges. This isn't just about protecting your property anymore, Dad, Marcus explained. We're building a case that will stop Patricia from victimizing other vulnerable homeowners with this systematic fraud scheme. Professional consultation from Marcus about criminal harassment prosecution gave me confidence that Patricia's systematic campaign had crossed multiple legal lines that would result in serious criminal consequences. Property pressure tactics, fraudulent legal documents, impersonating law enforcement. She's committed enough crimes to face significant prison time. He assured me our evidence gathering has documented a criminal enterprise that goes way beyond neighborhood harassment. His law enforcement expertise confirmed that we had the evidence and authority to stop Patricia's systematic fraud permanently. Community protection coordination with Judy was creating neighborhood witness support that would demonstrate Patricia's manipulation of multiple families beyond just my personal experience. We're organizing documentation assistance and harassment pattern testimony that will show systematic community manipulation. Judy explained, other neighbors are starting to realize they've been used in Patricia's pressure campaign, and they're willing to provide testimony about how she manipulated them into participating. The community support was growing as people realized they'd been used in a criminal scheme. Marcus closed his badge wallet and smiled. Dad, tomorrow morning, we end this forever. But neither of us knew Patricia was already setting her final trap. 6 a.m. came with the sound of aggressive pounding that was designed to create maximum psychological terror, exactly as Leonard had warned us. 2 men in police-style uniforms were standing on my doorstep with badges, official-looking paperwork, and attitudes that were meant to intimidate me into immediate compliance. Police, open immediately for community violation enforcement, they shouted through my door. You have 24 hours to vacate this property or face arrest for continued violation of municipal ordinances. The fake authority in their voices was convincing enough that any normal homeowner would have been terrified into submission. But Patricia had no idea what was waiting on the other side of my door. I had recording systems activated and witness coordination in place, exactly as Marcus and I had planned during our evidence preparation the night before. But here's the beautiful part. Marcus reached the door first, opening it in his full county deputy sheriff uniform, while I stayed back to document everything with our recording equipment. County Sheriff's Department, step back and identify yourselves immediately, Marcus commanded with the voice of real law enforcement authority, facing obvious criminal impersonation. The transformation on those fake cops' faces was absolutely priceless. They went from aggressive intimidation to pure panic in about 2 seconds flat. Marcus keyed his radio to county dispatch, logged the impersonation, and locked the scene into the evidence chain in under a minute. Dispatch, this is Deputy Mitchell reporting attempted impersonation of law enforcement officers at my current location, he said into his radio while keeping his eyes fixed on the increasingly nervous fake cops. I need immediate backup and verification of any legitimate warrants for this address. The professional protocol was establishing an unbreakable legal record of Patricia's criminal scheme, and the fake officers were realizing they'd walked into a law enforcement trap instead of intimidating a vulnerable homeowner. The fake police credentials were immediately exposed as fraudulent when Marcus examined their documentation with professional law enforcement expertise. Wrong county seal, invalid case numbers, patrol vehicle that was clearly a rental car with fake emergency lights. These weren't even good imitations of legitimate law enforcement equipment. These warrants are completely fabricated, Marcus announced loudly enough for my recording equipment to capture. You're wearing costume rental uniforms, carrying expired badge numbers, and attempting to enforce non-existent municipal ordinances. The amateur quality of Patricia's fake police scheme was becoming obvious to anyone with real law enforcement knowledge. Patricia was watching from her vehicle in what she thought was a concealed surveillance position, expecting to witness my psychological breakdown and property surrender. Instead, she was watching her elaborate criminal scheme collapse in real time as real law enforcement arrested her hired actors for criminal impersonation. The expression on her face transformed from confident anticipation to complete horror as she realized that her final intimidation attempt had become a criminal prosecution opportunity. Her victory smile died so fast you could practically hear it hit the pavement. Tom Bradford's escape attempt was immediate and panicked once he realized that real law enforcement was involved in what he thought was a simple property pressure operation. His expensive car pulled away from the neighborhood so quickly that he left tire marks on the asphalt, abandoning Patricia and the fake police operation entirely when faced with actual criminal consequences. The development partnership was dissolving in real time as both conspirators realized they were facing serious prison time rather than profitable property acquisition. The community's witness to the emergence was remarkable as neighbors came out to document Patricia's criminal scheme and expressed shock about the systematic manipulation they had unknowingly participated in. "We had no idea Patricia was running a criminal operation," said one neighbor who'd signed her template complaints. "She told us you were violating community standards, not that she was trying to steal your property through fraud and intimidation." The community support was shifting dramatically as people realized they'd been used as unknowing participants in a systematic property theft scheme. Leonard's immediate cooperation with Marcus provided a complete confession about the harassment campaign, financial coercion, and criminal conspiracy that confirmed everything we'd suspected about Patricia's systematic manipulation. "She promised me steady property management income if I helped pressure David into selling," he told Marcus while being recorded for official witness testimony. "I didn't realize she was committing crimes. I thought she had legitimate HOA authority." His unemployment desperation had made him vulnerable to Patricia's manipulation, but his cooperation was providing crucial evidence for prosecution. The fake officers' panic response was immediate and incriminating as they attempted to flee while discarding fake badges, costume uniforms, and fraudulent warrants that provided physical evidence of the criminal impersonation scheme. Marcus maintained professional scene control while calling for backup to arrest the fleeing actors and secure all evidence for prosecution. "You're under arrest for impersonating law enforcement officers, attempted extortion, and conspiracy," he announced while applying handcuffs with the efficiency of professional law enforcement training. Property value confirmation through our professional research provided context for why Patricia had been willing to commit serious crimes to acquire my property below market value. For $20 $2 million in commercial development value. Explained the motivation behind systematic harassment, fraudulent legal documents, and fake police intimidation. Patricia and Tom Bradford were trying to steal a multi-million-dollar payday through criminal pressure tactics. The financial stakes justified their criminal escalation from a business perspective, even though it guaranteed serious prison time from a legal perspective. Judy's witness testimony provided formal documentation of Patricia's systematic community manipulation and harassment pattern that demonstrated criminal behavior affecting multiple families beyond just my personal experience. "I watched Patricia systematically manipulate neighbors into participating in harassment through template complaints and social pressure," she told Marcus during an official statement recording. She was running a psychological warfare campaign designed to isolate David and pressure him into property surrender. Her educator training in recognizing abuse patterns made her testimony particularly valuable for prosecution purposes. The criminal charges were comprehensive and serious. Impersonating law enforcement officers, extortion, conspiracy, harassment, fraud, creating a prosecution package that would result in significant prison time for Patricia and her co-conspirators. Marcus coordinated with the county prosecutor's office to ensure proper evidence handling and charge filing that would maximize legal consequences for the systematic property theft scheme. "This isn't just harassment anymore," he explained to gathered neighbors. "This is organized criminal activity targeting vulnerable homeowners." Asset protection orders were immediately implemented to prevent Patricia from continuing her harassment campaign or attempting to interfere with my property rights during the prosecution process. County legal system coordination was providing immediate protection that maintained my ownership while Patricia faced a criminal trial for attempting to steal my property through systematic fraud and intimidation. The immediate legal protection was ensuring that Patricia's 6-month acquisition deadline would expire while she faced prison time rather than property profits. Marcus handcuffed those fake cops while Patricia watched her empire crumble, but the real destruction was only just beginning. Have you ever witnessed someone's fake authority get completely demolished by the real thing? Tell us about that moment when karma struck instantly. The media coverage explosion was immediate and devastating to Patricia's professional reputation in ways that would permanently destroy her real estate career and community standing. Local news outlets covered the fake police story with Patricia's arrest photo prominently displayed. Property fraud investigation details and criminal conspiracy charges that were broadcast throughout the entire county. The story had everything that local media loved: suburban drama, criminal impersonation, property fraud, and the kind of instant justice that made viewers feel satisfied about criminal consequences. Patricia's mugshot was suddenly appearing on evening news broadcasts and newspaper websites, ensuring that everyone in the real estate community would know about her criminal behavior. Professional reputation destruction was swift and comprehensive as Patricia's real estate license was immediately suspended, pending criminal investigation. Business partnerships were terminated by panicked associates, and professional associations began reviewing membership standards that would permanently ban her from the industry. The criminal charges made it impossible for her to continue any legitimate real estate activities. And her systematic fraud scheme had created liability issues for anyone who had been associated with her business operations. Tom Bradford's development company was also facing investigation for conspiracy charges that would destroy his commercial property acquisition business. 3 victim families came forward with identical harassment experiences that established Patricia's systematic pattern of targeting vulnerable homeowners in development zones for below-market property acquisition. The Johnson family described harassment identical to mine. The elderly Henderson couple had faced similar financial pressure tactics, and Maria Santos, a single mother, had been pressured through the same template complaint system that Patricia had used against me. Their testimony provided prosecutors with evidence of systematic criminal enterprise rather than isolated harassment, which would significantly increase criminal penalties. Community accountability became unavoidable as neighbors who'd enabled Patricia's harassment were forced to face direct questions about their participation in what they now understood was a criminal conspiracy. The template complaint signers were expressing genuine regret about the systematic manipulation they had unknowingly supported. And several neighbors were volunteering to provide testimony about how Patricia had pressured them into participating through lies about community safety and property values. The social pressure that Patricia had weaponized against me was now turned against her and her enabling supporters. Leonard's comprehensive cooperation provided prosecutors with detailed testimony about Patricia's manipulation methods, financial coercion tactics, and criminal conspiracy organization that would be crucial for successful prosecution. His unemployment desperation had made him vulnerable to Patricia's promises of consulting income. But his willingness to testify about systematic coercion was helping prosecutors understand the full scope of her criminal enterprise. Leonard's cooperation also provided him with immunity from prosecution in exchange for testimony that would convict the primary conspirators. Tom Bradford's investigation revealed his development company's systematic targeting of vulnerable property owners during transition periods like divorce, death, and financial crisis for optimal psychological manipulation. His business model involved identifying res zoning opportunities, pressuring homeowners into below-market sales, then reaping massive profits when commercial development became public knowledge. The systematic nature of his property acquisition strategy was exposing a criminal enterprise that had victimized multiple families throughout the county. Asset protection expansion through court orders was protecting all victim properties from continued harassment while preventing Patricia and Tom Bradford from interfering with ownership rights during prosecution proceedings. The legal system was ensuring that their criminal behavior wouldn't result in any property acquisition benefits and their systematic fraud scheme would not profit them in any way. All victim families were receiving immediate protection that maintained their property rights while the criminals faced trial. Public record revelation showed Patricia's systematic attendance at city planning meetings, where she'd gained legitimate access to res zoning information through her real estate license, combined with sophisticated MLS database research that provided the inside information she'd used for targeting specific properties. Her professional real estate knowledge had been weaponized for criminal property acquisition rather than legitimate business purposes, creating additional fraud charges related to professional licensing violations that would permanently destroy her career. HOA governance reform was implemented immediately with new bylaws requiring transparency, recorded meetings, legal oversight, and harassment prevention protocols that would prevent future abuse of homeowner association authority. The community was establishing protection mechanisms that would make it impossible for anyone to use HOA authority for personal financial gain or systematic harassment campaigns. Judy was helping organize ongoing education about harassment prevention and community accountability standards. Media forensics coverage was revealing the sophisticated coordination behind Patricia's harassment campaign, including professional template creation, digital manipulation timing, and systematic community pressure tactics that exceeded typical neighbor disputes. Professional examination of her methods was being covered by regional media as a warning to other communities about predatory real estate schemes targeting vulnerable homeowners. The educational impact was helping other neighborhoods recognize similar systematic fraud operations. The community healing process was beginning as neighbors implemented accountability protocols and protection standards that would prevent future manipulation while supporting harassment victims through systematic assistance programs. The neighborhood was transforming from Patricia's intimidation targets into a community protection model that could help other areas defend against predatory schemes. Judy's leadership was organizing ongoing support networks and prevention education that would benefit families beyond our immediate neighborhood. Professional recognition for my civilian investigation methods was coming from law enforcement agencies that praised the evidence quality and systematic documentation that had made prosecution possible. My insurance investigation background had created documentation standards that exceeded typical civilian evidence gathering. And the case was becoming a training example for both law enforcement and community protection education. The systematic approach to evidence gathering was being recognized as a model for defending against property fraud schemes. Victim compensation through civil litigation provided restitution for harassment damages, legal expenses, and emotional distress that would help all affected families recover from Patricia's systematic campaign. The criminal asset seizure was funding victim assistance programs that would provide ongoing support for harassment victims and community protection education. The financial justice was ensuring that crime would not profit the perpetrators while providing recovery resources for their victims. Professional impact expansion was influencing regional law enforcement training about property fraud recognition, civilian evidence gathering techniques, and community protection strategies that would help other areas defend against similar systematic schemes. The case demonstrated that professional investigation skills combined with law enforcement cooperation could successfully stop sophisticated criminal operations targeting vulnerable homeowners. When 3 more families stepped forward with identical stories, Patricia's criminal empire wasn't just crumbling, it was about to face judge and jury. The court's sentencing delivered justice that matched the severity of Patricia's systematic criminal campaign against vulnerable homeowners throughout our community. Patricia received 3 years in state prison for conspiracy, harassment, fraud, and extortion, while Tom Bradford received 2 years for conspiracy and business fraud related to their property acquisition scheme. The judge specifically noted that their systematic targeting of vulnerable homeowners during life transitions like divorce, death, and financial crisis represented particularly cruel criminal behavior that warranted maximum sentences under state guidelines. Leonard received probation for his cooperation and victim status along with community service requirements that would help him rebuild his reputation through harassment prevention advocacy. Civil settlement completion provided $340,000 in total victim compensation from Patricia's seized real estate business assets and Tom Bradford's development company accounts. The court ordered complete asset forfeit of their business equipment, property investments, and luxury purchases that had been funded through systematic fraud schemes targeting multiple families. The financial justice was ensuring that their criminal behavior would not only fail to profit them, but would actually provide compensation for the victims they'd systematically terrorized through their property acquisition campaign. Property development proceeded through ethical channels that maintain neighborhood character while creating community benefits and funding ongoing victim assistance programs. I coordinated with responsible developers who respected residential character and provided employment opportunities for neighborhood residents while contributing to harassment prevention, education, funding. The commercial res zoning that Patricia had tried to exploit through criminal means was becoming a community benefit rather than an individual profit opportunity, demonstrating that ethical development could benefit everyone rather than just predatory investors. A victim compensation ceremony was conducted by the county judge at my doorstep where Patricia's fake police scheme had collapsed, creating symbolic justice at the exact location where her criminal intimidation had failed so spectacularly. Judge Harrison signed the final settlement papers on my front porch while Marcus stood in his deputy sheriff uniform next to the same door where fake cops had tried to terrorize me into property surrender. The ceremony was attracting media coverage that would warn other communities about predatory real estate schemes while celebrating the successful prosecution of systematic property fraud. Community governance transformation was complete with new HOA leadership implementing transparency protocols, harassment prevention standards, and legal oversight procedures that would prevent future abuse of homeowner association authority. The new bylaws required recorded meetings, independent legal review of enforcement actions, and community accountability standards that made it impossible for anyone to use HOA authority for personal financial gain. Judy had been elected to the new HOA board and was implementing education programs about harassment recognition and prevention. The press conference and final settlement at my front step were enough. We didn't need a victory lap, just a clean record and a quiet neighborhood. The Victim Assistance Foundation was established using settlement funds to provide ongoing legal assistance, harassment prevention education, and community protection resources for vulnerable homeowners throughout the county. The foundation was creating permanent programs that would help harassment victims document criminal behavior, access legal assistance, and coordinate with law enforcement for the successful prosecution of systematic fraud schemes. Judy was serving on the foundation board to provide educator expertise about harassment recognition and prevention. Educational legacy was established as the case became a state law enforcement training standard for property fraud investigation, community protection coordination, and civilian evidence gathering techniques that could support criminal prosecution. Regional law enforcement agencies were using our systematic approach as a model for training officers about property pressure schemes and the importance of civilian cooperation in building prosecution cases. The educational impact was helping law enforcement agencies throughout the state recognize and prosecute similar criminal operations. Leonard's rehabilitation was progressing through victim advocacy work, community service, and harassment prevention education that was helping him rebuild his reputation while contributing to community protection efforts. His unemployment desperation had made him vulnerable to Patricia's manipulation, but his cooperation with prosecution and ongoing advocacy work was demonstrating a genuine commitment to preventing other families from experiencing systematic harassment. His transformation from reluctant participant to victim advocate provided hope for other people who'd been manipulated into participating in criminal schemes. Judy's advocacy expansion was creating regional harassment prevention networks that were implementing victim support systems and community protection education throughout multiple counties. Her teacher training in recognizing abuse patterns was being applied to community education programs that would help other neighborhoods recognize and prevent systematic manipulation campaigns. The regional network was providing resources and coordination that would protect vulnerable homeowners from predatory schemes like Patricia's systematic fraud operation. Marcus' family protection work was continuing through his law enforcement assignment to our local area, providing ongoing community safety presence and crime prevention education that would deter future criminal schemes targeting vulnerable homeowners. His professional expertise in evidence gathering and criminal prosecution was being shared with other law enforcement agencies to improve their response to property fraud schemes. The ongoing law enforcement presence was ensuring that our community would remain protected from predatory operators. Media legacy conclusion was providing regional coverage that warned communities about predatory real estate schemes while offering victim protection resources and prevention strategies that could help other areas defend against systematic fraud operations. The story was being used by community protection organizations throughout the state as an example of successful civilian resistance to criminal harassment and the importance of systematic evidence gathering for prosecution support. Professional impact was permanent as my investigation methods were influencing industry standards for civilian fraud detection, victim empowerment strategies, and community protection education that would help other vulnerable homeowners defend against systematic pressure campaigns. The case demonstrated that professional investigation skills combined with law enforcement cooperation and community support could successfully stop sophisticated criminal operations targeting vulnerable property owners. Symbolic closure was perfect as annual community protection celebrations were being held at the same doorstep where Patricia's criminal scheme had collapsed, commemorating justice victory, victim empowerment, and criminal defeat while educating new residents about harassment prevention and community accountability standards. The doorstep where criminal intimidation had failed was becoming a symbol of successful resistance to systematic fraud and the importance of community protection cooperation. Perfect symbolic resolution occurred as the doorstep where Patricia had attempted her final criminal intimidation became the site of a justice ceremony, victim empowerment celebration, and community protection education that would prevent future families from experiencing systematic harassment. Judge Harrison's final settlement signing at my front door completed the justice circle where Patricia's criminal scheme had attempted intimidation, but delivered community empowerment instead. When that fake police scheme collapsed on my doorstep, justice was served exactly where they tried to steal my home. And every bully should remember that real authority always beats fake power. That's how we do justice here at the Silent Brave, where every tale echoes the truth that good people can fight back and win. If this story of instant karma hitting a property thief made your day, smash that like button to let us know. We'll see you in the next video where another The Silent Brave proves that justice always finds a way.